Now, these 5 language education tools, there's the CEFR, there's the ELP, there's Europass. Jackie asked me to talk about Europass, and I'll try to do so, but it's in square brackets because this is not an instrument of the Council of Europe, it's an invention of the European Union, which nevertheless is parasitic on the CFR and the ELP. The autobiography Intercultural Encounters is number 4, and number 5 is the foundational language education policy document, which has this rather long title, From Linguistic Diversity to Plurilingual Education, Guide for the Development of Language Education Policies in Europe. That arose from reflection on the increased importance given to the plurilingualism of the individual in the Common European Framework, and of course led towards the current project, which is focused on developing policies of plurilingual and intercultural education. So those are the 5 tools that I've been asked to say something about. So let's start with the CFR. Now, how many people here have read it? So about 60%, I'd say. How many would claim close familiarity? Okay, those who are making those claims are looking around to see who else is daring to make them. All right. Well, we won't delay too long on this, but the first thing that everybody knows about the framework is, of course, that there are 6 levels of proficiency. You've heard of Ryanair, haven't you? Yes. Ryanair? Well, Michael O'Leary, the chief executive of Ryanair, whenever he's interviewed on television and is pouring scorn on the incompetence, stupidity and everything else of our government ministers, always copper fastens their stupidity by saying the dogs in the street know this, that and the other. Well, the dogs in the street of almost every European capital know A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. And I had interesting confirmation of this a couple of years ago when I was starting a project with the philological faculty in the University of Belgrade, and I was walking from my hotel to the faculty and suddenly came upon a bus shelter, and there was an enormous advertisement for British Council English courses. But the advertisement was in the form of a bus route, where the first stop was A1, and the second stop, and then in small print underneath each of these levels was the Cambridge exam that you would have the privilege of paying to enter in due course. You may also know that the framework has these labels, and the first 4 rather, are historical. The Council of Europe back in the 1970s, as you may very well know, started to develop these functional, notional specifications of communicative repertoire, conceived as being at the threshold of crossing over into the target language community as a free communicative agent. That's the threshold level. At Waystage, not sure who invented that, but the idea is that's on the way. These labels strike me slightly as, you know, these... I once gave a talk in Tokyo in a place called Sonic City, and these labels are a bit like that, at least Waystage. At Breakthrough, you can see what that's about. Vantage, this is the idea that, you know, you reach a plateau and you can look around and enjoy the view. I think that's John Trim's invention. Effective operational proficiency, they must have been asleep. And mastery, in my view, is a mistake, because, you see, it's fundamental to the concept of action-oriented language learning based on language use, that mastery in your particular situation given your particular resources, might actually be A1. So I think these things are not very happy, and it's interesting that the Secretariat tries not to be reminded of them too often. But it's worth pointing these things out because it shows that the CEFR isn't a seamless thing. It's a historical development and evolution. And when you become more and more familiar with it, so you become more and more aware of the levels and the joins. And then, of course, the two A levels are joined up to make a band basic user, B independent user, C proficient user, and that's why the letters are used twice over, of course. One of the reasons why this whole scheme was so easy to sell to the private language teaching sector across Europe, apart from the fact that the testing agencies were keen on it, was that it corresponded without too much adjustment to beginner, intermediate, and advanced. There's a global scale, and this again is perhaps a mistake, because what it does is to try to specify an overall proficiency for each of the levels, whereas the advantage of having an empirically derived set of descriptors for each of the levels in relation to a whole series of activities is that you can use it for profiling and more easily reflect the fact that very few of us have the same level of proficiency across all the communicative activities or skills. I can read that from here, I don't know whether you can, but that's B1. So if you're B1, and remember this is threshold level, so this is what you can do if you're capable of acting as a free communicative agent among native speakers of the language. You can understand the main points of clear standard input on familiar matters regularly encountered in work, school, leisure, etc. You can deal with most situations likely to arise whilst travelling in an area where the language is spoken. Now, that's an interesting historical hangover, because when the threshold level was first promoted back in 1975, widespread travel was not a European reality. And so still there's a bit of an orientation to, or at least an echo, of the days when you learnt a language now in order, if you were lucky, to go abroad at some time in the future and try it out. You can produce simple connected text on topics which are familiar or of personal interest. I think produce means here writing, but it could be spoken production. You can describe experiences and events, dreams, hopes and ambitions, and briefly give reasons and explanations for opinions and plans. So that's threshold level.